Hello, everybody. Welcome to our How to Connect webinar on the Electoral College. I'm going to ask you guys who are very active and amazing in the comments to let us know if you can or cannot hear us now or at any point. So somebody just type a comment and let us know whether you can hear us okay. I'm going to remind you before we get going about the upcoming webinars we have. We have 2 more webinars and 1 event to culminate. Thank you, Hunter, to culminate everything. So our next webinar is on October 23rd at 10 a.m. and it's called No Small Elections. So it's about the importance of small or local elections. The next one is 2 days later, October 25th. That's an evening webinar, 6 p.m. That's the cost of free speech. It's about the First Amendment. And then this culminates in an exercise, the vote activity that we have on 2 different days, which I can tell you what they are, even though they're not on the screen, because I have that power. On November 1st at 11 a.m. and November 2nd at 1 p.m., both starting at the Trinity River campus downtown. All right, so I am Allegra Davis Hanna. I'm an English instructor for Tarrant County College. I see some of my students are here. I'm your host and an Electoral College novice. I'm also here with Misty Wilson Mertens, Professor of History and Department Chair, and Dr. Leah Tarwater, also Professor of History, and they're going to give you the actual information. I'm mostly here for entertainment value. So you're going to start by pulling up a quiz. So in your comments under the video, you should see a link to something called the pre-webinar survey. If you click that link, it will take you to a short 6-question quiz. You're not being graded on this quiz, so if you don't know the answers, it's okay. We just want to see where you stand with your knowledge and opinions on the Electoral College before we get started. So let us know in the comments if you have trouble accessing that link. Already we have respondents, so they have no trouble. Our students are very good with technology. All right. Are we ready to get started? So today we're discussing the Republic, the Electoral College, and our illustrious professors are going to attempt to answer one question. How does my vote count? And that's my vote, me personally, Allegra Davis Hanna. How does my vote count? Just kidding. Anybody's. So, Misty, what's our system? Is it a democracy?
So we sometimes use shorthand and we say that our system is a democracy, but it's really, truly not a democracy. And I know that sounds bad, but it doesn't have to be. So a democracy, a real true dramatic democracy, means that we would survey our citizens, we would vote every time something comes up. So we would have to vote one all the time for every little thing.
Okay.
The other part of a democracy that would be challenging is that sometimes people in large groups don't make good decisions.
You don't say.
Yes, it's been known to happen.
Okay.
So if you think about everybody you know in your life, and if they had control over everything in our government, that would be kind of a mess.
Yes. Me personally, people in my life,
Yes.
that would be a mess. Yeah.
So we should look back and see what our founding fathers think about all this. And because I'm a history professor, that's what I do, right? I just look up what old dead people say about things.
Yep, that's what you do.
So this is what James Madison had to say about democracies. Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever found it incomparable with personal security or the rights of property, and in general have been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. So if you want a genocide, a really great way to have that happen is to have a democracy.
Oh.
Because we could all vote to kill one group of people.
That's true.
And if it's a true direct democracy, that can happen.
Okay, so you're saying there's no checks there.
There's no checks.
Got it.
And a direct democracy really only works on a small scale. If we're stranded on a desert island and we're voting where to build a building or where to dig for water, that might work.
I saw the show Lost. It did not work.
But the other thing that I wanted to point out to you is this other quote. by Elderbridge Gary, and this is another one of our early founding fathers. He was a constitutional delegate. He actually did not sign the Constitution.
I've never heard this person's name before in my life.
He thought the Constitution had too much democracy in it. He said, the evils we experience flow from the excess of democracy. The people do not want virtue, but are dupes of pretend patriots.
What does that mean?
It means that people can be misled easily.
True.
That a demigod can come along and he talks nice and people like what he says, so they follow him. And so we need some checks there. Direct democracy isn't really what our system is based on.
Okay.
So our system instead is a representative republic.
So we don't live in a democracy.
We live in a democratic republic.
Okay.
So there's democracy involved.
I'm learning so much already.
So when we talk about a representative republic, what we're talking about is that we elect people to represent us.
Mm-hmm.
And this solves a lot of the problems we have with democracies. So you have a group of people, a smaller group of people that can devote their time to studying the issues, to being informed voters, but they're responsible to us. So if our representatives start voting in a way that we don't like, we can vote them out.
Okay.
So this is also Madison.
So this is
here.
why elections are important.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Because you're voting for the people who vote for you.
Yes.
Okay.
You're voting for your representative to the republic.
Got it.
So Madison said a republic, by which I mean a government in which the scheme of representation takes place, opens a different prospect and promises the cure for which we are seeking.
Okay. What were we curing?
We were curing monarchy and
Okay.
tyranny, but also mob rule.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a group of representatives, senators, mayors even, they're going to be slow and deliberate, and they're not going to be carried away by their passions. They're going to think things through. So this elected body represents us, and we use democracy to pick that elected body,
Mm-hmm.
but they themselves are not a direct democracy because they're representing the voice of the people. So this is a little bit sometimes confusing, but when we talk about how your vote counts, we don't vote for every single piece of legislation, right?
I mean, I feel like I don't.
But you vote for the people who do vote for those things.
Right.
So in legislation, we have indirect democracy. And our representatives, most of them,
Mm-hmm.
we have direct democracy. Because you're directly electing the senator. If one person gets 10 votes and one person gets 8 votes, the one with 10 wins.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases. Not all cases.
Oh, so you're saying we live in a democratic republic.
Yes,
Is it democratic?
kind of.
I don't like that answer.
So it's more democratic than it used to be. When you think about when our republic was first started, who could vote? If you were alive in 1800, could you have voted, Allegra?
Not me. No, I'm a lady.
Right. Do you own property?
Well, I don't think women were allowed to.
So
So
if you were a male, do you even own property?
no.
So you couldn't have voted.
Do
anyway.
dogs count?
No.
No.
Those are not livestock.
Okay, then no.
So if you didn't have property or a business or you weren't male, you couldn't vote. Not exactly democratic. Right?
Sounds fair.
As we go on,
Just kidding.
we start to see changes. So in the 1820s, we become more democratic. We
Mhm.
removed the property requirement to vote.
Okay.
When we did that, the percentage of people that voted in elections went up to 80%.
Wow.
80% of possible voters voted. Isn't
What
that
is
crazy?
what is it now?
57.
Yeah, we're near that.
Okay.
We're near it.
Much
Yeah.
lower. So, and that's in a presidential year, it's 57.
Mhm.
I think in mayoral elections, you're lucky if you get 14%.
Dang.
And then we're going to, of course, allow former slaves to vote with the 14th Amendment. With the 19th Amendment, we opened the door to women to voting. So we have grown in our democracy. We've expanded democracy over time. We've also changed the way that we thought about democracy. So we used to believe that we shouldn't directly elect our senators. We thought that might end up in mob rule.
So what we used electors for our senators?
Yes.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And the state legislature chose them. It was also a check on the federal government by the
Yes.
states.
But it was this idea that we, the people, couldn't be trusted to pick our senators, which is supposed to be the more deliberate body of the government.
Mm-hmm.
because we might get carried away and like vote for Britney Spears or something.
I might. Just kidding.
So in the 17th Amendment, we switched that and we now had direct election of senators. And if you go back and read newspaper articles at that time, there were people that were talking about how this is the downfall of America. Directly electing to senators was going to lead to rioting, rampant loss of property.
Yeah,
it was a big change and it was scary. But guess what?
We survived.
Nothing bad happened.
Well,
and actually the same people continued to be elected. So it wasn't even a huge change on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So in most cases, your vote counts, right? But it counts indirectly because you're voting for the people who are going to vote for you.
Yes.
So make your voice heard. Make sure you go to those votes. Make sure that you do that because otherwise your electors can do whatever they want.
Okay. How do I choose? What you're saying? I choose electors or I choose senators and representatives?
You choose senators and representatives.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You choose people who are going to pass legislation for you.
Right.
So if they're doing a bunch of things you don't like, you should take the time to vote.
Yes.
To make sure that they don't stay in power. Or if you like what they do, you should go vote and support them.
Absolutely. And one of our senators is up for re-election next month.
Yes. And I hope everybody has been registered to vote.
Yes.
Because the deadline was
The
yesterday.
deadline has passed to register, but if you are registered, you can begin early voting on October 22nd. So somebody tell me, what is the Electoral College?
So, the Electoral College is a process. It's a process that established in the United States Constitution by which we elect the President of the United States. So the Electoral College is essentially, in a nutshell, how we elect our president.
Does the Electoral College have a football team?
Not a very good one.
Okay.
No football team for this college.
Oh, we've got some memes.
Yes, I know. Don't you love me for it? So I thought, I actually was looking for one last night to remind my class about this. And I thought, my gosh, there are an insane number of memes about the Electoral College, and I don't know why that surprised me. But so this, in a nutshell, I think tells you how Americans feel about the Electoral College. And really all of them together say, my vote doesn't count, right?
Mm-hmm.
They all pretty much together say the Electoral College makes this decision, therefore the vote that I cast does not matter. So I guess then the question would be,
why don't people like it?
People don't like the Electoral College for a few reasons. I feel like a lot of the times they just may not understand it. And I think those memes reflect a misunderstanding of the Electoral College.
I should tell you, of the people listening to our webinar right now, 66% say the Electoral College should be reformed, 11% say abolished,
oh, wow.
and 22% say it should function as the founders intended.
So 22% of y'all are okay with it. That's not very many people.
That's not. So over 77% think we should get rid of it or change it fundamentally.
Okay. All right. Well, let's explain how it works. Well, actually, let's continue with why you don't like it.
I don't like it.
You don't like it,
Yeah.
yes. And then maybe why some of our listeners don't like it. Okay. So they may not understand it. And that kind of goes back to the memes. They might feel like their votes don't count. They might feel like it doesn't reflect the will of the people, that it doesn't give equal weight to all votes, or maybe they might feel that it discourages people from voting in solid states or non-swing states.
I'm going to stop
yes,
right there
go ahead.
because I think that one's a really important one. Because you hear people say, oh, my vote doesn't count. Because we live in Texas, it's a very solid one-way state.
Mhm.
My
Right
vote
now
doesn't
it is.
count.
Yes.
Right.
Mhm.
Or, if I live in New York, it's a pretty solid one-way
Right.
state. My
Mhm.
vote doesn't count. Why should I go vote?
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of those times where it helps to understand history, because California hasn't always been a solidly Democratic state. Texas hasn't always been a solidly Republican state. And so, if you never vote because you feel that way, then that won't ever change. Absolutely. Sometimes people want to change the Electoral College or don't like it because their candidate may have lost the election, which, that can be understandable if you don't like the person that just won. But, and then there's the rare year where the candidate with the popular vote didn't actually win the electoral vote. That really has not happened that many times in our nation's past, but it has happened. And so that leads some people to think it's not good, and we should change this, and so we should change the system. I should say that our goal here is not to change your mind, not to change how you feel about the Electoral College, but simply to explain what the founders created and how your vote does count.
So Leah, tell me, so the popular vote is all the votes voted in America for a national election tallied together.
Yes.
So I could win the popular vote.
Right. But still.
But because of the way the states are divvied up,
yes,
you could lose the election because of the Electoral College.
Yes.
Okay. So what is the Constitution telling us about the Electoral College?
Okay, so here is the section of the Constitution. It's Article 2, Section 1, and it says, each state shall appoint in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress, but no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. Okay, so it's pretty much telling you how we come up with the number of the electors and who can be one. So
states pick their own electors.
States pick their own electors.
Okay.
In fact, political parties within the state pick their own electors. The Constitution establishes how many we have based upon how many congressmen we have. So you get an equal number to representatives, which of course is based upon population. And so every state has the number of electors, the same number of electors as they have representatives, plus 2, which represents the 2 senators. So, for example, Texas has 36 representatives, and then you add the 2 senators to that, and that's 38.
So we have 38 electors.
We have 38 electors. And so going back to your question, the states have their own electors that represent the people within that state.
Okay.
But they actually represent the party. So it is the political parties within the state that elect them, and I'll get into that a little bit more here in a second. But here's a map that just shows the number of electors that each of these states have within the U.S. And so you can see again, Texas has 38. California has the most with 55. And then you have some smaller states. Vermont has 3, so they only have 1 representative plus their 2 senators. That's 3 electors. And actually, there's multiple states that have 3, the Dakotas and
okay.
This might be a geography test here. So Alaska, I know that one. Total to win the presidency, you need 270 electoral votes.
How many total are there?
There are 538 electors.
Okay.
So if somebody was so inclined to want to get a map and make some simulations,
yes.
A way to do that?
Yes.
So there's another link, I believe, in your comments, and it says Electoral College Simulation, and that's the website 270towin.com, and that's really there for you to kind of play around on, and you can see if this state voted this way and this state voted this way, how different paths that a candidate could take to win enough electoral votes to win the presidency.
The Electoral College actually has a website as well, and the U.S. government has a website for the Electoral College, but it also has the interactive maps, and you can actually go and look at past presidential elections and change it. And I don't know. I didn't actually.
You know what I'm always intrigued by, right? When they show the maps on election day, it always looks different than it is because the states that take up the most space and therefore have them,
right.
You know what I mean? So like Montana is very large,
right,
but it has a very few number of votes.
3.
So it looks deceiving when you look at the colored, the map with all the colors on it, right?
So Allegra, I'm glad you brought that up because the other link we have there is a pinpoint map. So people can click on that one and it shows the 2016 presidential election.
That's the New York Times link?
Yes.
Okay.
And it shows with shades of the color, the most intense voting and the least intense voting. So you can see where there are the most and least votes based on the shading and the coloring.
Okay. Okay. So how does it work?
Okay, so the way that the Electoral College works is there are, as we just established, 538 electors. And you, by casting a vote in November in the presidential races, you help to choose your state elector, your state's electors. So when you cast a vote for a candidate, you are actually voting for an elector who will represent you whenever they cast their vote for president.
When's our next presidential election?
2 years. So,
2020.
2020.
All right.
Yes.
One of our
ready.
students already
They're
put their
already
Britney
thinking.
Spears 2020.
Britney Spears 2020.
Oh, God help us. So on election day, really there are 51 popular elections, one in each state, one in DC, and each election is guided by the election codes within that state. And they really, in those elections, what you're doing is you are voting for the electors from your state. Most states have a winner-take-all system. So Texas has that. So that means whoever wins the popular plurality or the popular vote in Texas, all 38 of those electoral votes would go to the winner of Texas. So if you go back to 2016, all 38 went to Donald Trump because he won the state of Texas. But there are two exceptions to that winner-take-all system, and that's Maine and Nebraska. And they have a proportional system. So they have two at-large electors, which of course that would represent the senators, right? So they vote for the winner of the state as a whole. And then the remaining electors represent congressional districts. So they would vote according to who won the congressional district that they won.
Interesting.
Yes. So that means, you know, and actually, hold on, I wrote it down. Let's see if I can find that. And maybe I didn't write it down. So typically, though, actually in these states, what I found is that statewide winners have swept all of the districts in every election except 2008, 2016 in those two states. But in 2008 and 2016, all of their electors didn't go to one person, so they were divided between the two candidates.
Okay, so they sometimes split the votes in those states.
In those states, yes, definitely. And then, so in November, we vote for our electors, and then there is a meeting of the electors, which takes place on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in the December after.
Who wrote that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. Yeah, definitely. As simple as it could possibly be.
Can I ask you an off-the-wall question?
Oh, no. Yeah.
Is it possible for an elector to vote different than they were sent there to vote?
They are called faithless electors, and it is possible.
It is
And
possible.
I'll talk a little bit more about it.
Okay.
But that's a really good
I'm
question,
getting ahead.
because
Okay.
I know our students were probably wondering that question. So on this Monday in December, the electors from the states will meet somewhere within their own state. They will cast their ballots, and then the results will be sent to Congress and the National Archives. And in the beginning of January, there will be a joint session of Congress where they go through the ballots, and then they officially say who the next president of the United States is. So that is the system. That is how the Electoral College works in a nutshell.
Okay, so how did the founders feel about it?
Well, the founders created this really as a compromise between the election of the president by a vote in Congress and an election by a popular vote of qualified citizens. So if Congress were to vote for our executive, then we wouldn't have a separation of powers within our government, really.
But that was something that was an idea on the table.
That was an idea.
That
To
was
have-
actually what we did under the Articles of Confederation.
The Congress voted for the president.
Well,
Yes.
because he was technically the president of
The Congress.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, but yeah, that's a good point. So they didn't want Congress to elect the president, but they also didn't want the citizens to directly vote for the president either. So the dilemma was to create a system that would allow majorities to rule, but only when they were reasonable and not tyrannical. They wanted to prevent the tyranny of the majority rule. And actually, you had a quote that I guess you took
Yeah,
out
I guess
of
it got
your
cut
PowerPoint.
out. I thought it was going to be on there, but it wasn't.
And I lost it. And okay, so Marvin Simpkins said, democracy is not freedom. Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to eat for lunch. So if the two wolves and a lamb vote on what to eat for lunch, that lamb is clearly going to be lunch. And so that's pretty much what they mean by tyranny of the majority rule. And so The goal was let the people have a say, but prevent the tyranny of the majority. So they have to create a fair way to elect an executive for a nation that has both large and small states, which have relinquished some, but not all of their sovereignty. So they need to balance the fact that there are some really big states, but there are also some really small states, and they both need to have a say in this election. And then the states have been given a lot of power in the Constitution. So you need to make sure to protect that sovereignty. And so that's one of the things the Electoral College helps to do. Yeah, am I losing you? You kind of had a
No.
I'm losing you. I'm losing her.
I'm just wondering, are there, I mean, I'm not good at math, but are there states where a single individual's vote is proportionally worth more than in other states?
So it shouldn't be that way with the Electoral College. And that's the way that the Electoral College is designed. It's designed to make sure that the people in Montana's vote is equal to the people in Texas's vote, proportionally. So no.
How often do they reevaluate how many electors go in a state?
Every 10 years with the census.
With the census, okay.
Yes.
Oh, because it's based on representatives in Congress.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Before we move on, one thing I want to add here about the founders and why they created it. I'm glad you brought up the census, Allegra, because one of the reasons this was created was to balance out free and slave power at the beginning of the founding of our nation. Because southern states got to count slaves. For every 5 slaves, 3 people. So the Electoral College helped balance out some of that, because otherwise the slave states would have had a large proportion who becomes president than the northern free states.
Right. There was always a power struggle between the free and slave states. So this helps to balance that out. Good. Thank you. Okay. So a little bit more about what the founders think about it. Just with some quotes, I'll give you their own words. And some of these point to their feelings of democracy as well. Alexander Hamilton says the ancient democracies in which the people themselves deliberated never possessed one feature of good government. Their very character was tyranny, their figure, deformity. So clearly he's not a fan of true democracies. He says never possessed one feature of good government. So John Adams says democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide.
Wow.
John Adams was particularly worried about people voting themselves into a higher social class. Basically, they would vote for themselves not to pay taxes. Which, I mean, if we could vote for that,
we all would. Ben Rush, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, said a simple democracy is one of the greatest evils. But then George Mason, who was a representative from, or a delegate from Virginia, kind of balances it out. He says, notwithstanding the oppression and injustice experienced among us from democracy, the genius of the people must be consulted. He says, yeah, we don't want a true democracy. It can lead to oppression and injustice, but we do need to consult the vote of the people. And that's ultimately what leads to the Electoral College, because our vote is consulted as we vote for the electors that represent us.
So talk to me about thinking of the country as states. Does the Electoral College help smaller states in any way?
Yeah, it definitely benefits the smaller states. They can't be overlooked by candidates because the system encourages coalition building and it encourages national campaigning. If you go back and look at that electoral map again, and you look at the Dakotas that have 3, Montana has 3, that means their population there is really small. So if it was just a popular vote, there would really be no incentive for candidates to visit those states if it was just a popular election. And I actually have a map here in a second that kind of goes back to that one that you posted the link to, and it'll give a visual to that. To win the electoral vote requires support from many different types of voters in different parts of the country. And getting votes from one region is not enough. So you have to campaign in all states. You can't just focus on California and Texas. You have to focus on all regions, all states, big or small.
So this keeps candidates from campaigning on things that are only appealing to people who live in big cities.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so here's that map I was talking about. So you can see the centers of population, like, well, Texas, you'll be more familiar with that. You can see Dallas is blue, right? That's Dallas County. You can see down in the middle of this state where Austin is, that's blue.
San Antonio is blue.
San Antonio is blue, and then of course most of California is blue. But if you look in the middle of the country, it's a completely different color. But you could see if it was a popular vote, and clearly the Democrats get more, I mean, by this map, more support in the larger population centers. Well, if we were just looking at population, the Democrats could just go there to these large areas of population, but so could the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And they could say, well, if I can, because then the Republicans could think, if I took votes away from them in Dallas, then that's where a lot of the population is. So then I don't need to waste my time on Montana and North Dakota
mm-hmm.
and Oklahoma. Wow, there's not even a blue county in Oklahoma. I'd never noticed that before.
Some lighter red.
There are some lighter reds,
but
yes.
not a single blue. And even in Kansas above it, it looks like it's just really Kansas City.
Yeah, this is exactly right.
And then Nebraska's just Omaha is the only blue.
So if we're just looking at the centers of population, what you see is that rural America would be completely unrepresented. If you just went for the popular vote, we only want to campaign for in these areas that have larger populations. And so it helps to keep the smaller states from being overlooked and ignored.
But you see why a Democratic voting individual in Oklahoma would think, what's the point of me voting in a presidential election? Because all of Oklahoma's electors are going to vote Republican no matter how I vote.
Well, it's not necessarily true because you're voting for those electors. So if you campaign for your candidate and you get out what your candidate stands for, and maybe there are people there who didn't understand that, and you can get them out and you can get other people voting like you, and more people go and vote for the Democratic elector, then it's possible to change that state.
I think that's also an argument, though, for reform, not abolishment
mm-hmm.
of the winner-take-all system of the Electoral College.
But fun fact about that, I actually was reading up on that a while ago, and one of the things that I read about it is that it would actually make it could actually make it go the opposite
mm-hmm.
of how your logic would think, because logically speaking, you think that makes more sense, the proportional representation, but that actually could make it more lopsided against the popular vote, because again, you look at all of those red, and if you look at this map, you would think that that Trump won in a landslide, right? If you just look at all the red on that,
right?
It looks like Trump won in a landslide.
Because again, the bigger areas are the least
that
populated,
right? And so you look at all of those congressional districts, and also you have to think of gerrymandering, plays a role, which is where district lines are drawn in a really crazy way. To get the vote to go a certain way or another. And so because of those reasons, if you do proportional voting, they can actually, more of them could have gone for Trump than for Hillary Clinton. And so it would have actually been more dramatically him getting the electoral vote over Clinton.
Interesting. So historically, how has this worked for us?
Okay, well, we'll start out with a couple of changes.
Can I jump in here real fast?
Oh, yeah.
Benjamin has a question that I think we kind of didn't answer very well. He says, if Montana has 1 million people and Texas has 28 million, Montana has 3 representatives, shouldn't Texas have 84? Well, the problem is we don't add new. We're capping it at 538.
Right. Yes, there's a cap on the number of representatives that each state can have. Each state has to have 1 representative. So Montana only has 1 representative, and then 2 senators. So they get 3 because they can't have 0 representatives. Does that make sense?
But we're also not adding seats to Congress.
No, we're not adding seats to Congress.
Electorals.
Right. So we have to divide the congressional seats among the states. And again, there are a lot of them whose population is very small, but they have to have at least 1 representative. And there's a lot of them that do only have 1 representative. So that would be why it's not.
But his point is right? That Montana's
Right, and
It
so
only
it
has
shows you how
yeah.
it shows you how this protects the small states. It shows you how the decision can't be made solely based upon the big states, because if Texas had 80, whatever Ben just said, then that would mean California would have over 100, and so then there's no way that anything Montana did would affect the election of our president. So that actually, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is a great way to exemplify how this helps the smaller states to have a say or a stake in the system, whereas if it was proportional, if it was the popular vote, their votes almost wouldn't matter.
But you could make the argument that people in Montana are getting a bigger vote proportionality than people in Texas.
I can't think of an argument against that.
Okay. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying the
right.
point stands that proportionally their vote is worth more than.
Well, because we're not debasing it off of necessarily vote by vote, and also because we're not adding more electors. If we can add more electors, then.
No, I understand why it is the way it is, but his point is correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's valid. All right, so the 12th Amendment in 1804 changed the process, and originally each elector got 2 votes, and whoever had the most votes became president, and whoever got the second most votes became vice president.
So, Allegra, imagine a world in which Donald Trump is president and Hillary Clinton is vice president.
I want to be a fly on the wall in that Oval Office.
Sunday dinner at the White House every Sunday?
Oh, it would be I'm sure they'd be exchanging lots of pleasantries.
Yes.
So, and in fact, that does happen in 1796, right? John Adams.
Don't look at me.
I was looking at Misty. John Adams is elected president, but Thomas Jefferson is elected vice president, and those two really weren't friends at that part of history. They didn't like each other. So it actually probably would have been similar to having Trump as president and Hillary Clinton as vice president. And then in 1800, there was just kind of a snafu as far as the votes, where there was pretty much a tie, and it gets sent to the House of Representatives. So they're like, okay, we need to fix this. So they fixed it to where the ballots are actually cast separately for president and vice president. And then that does allow people from the same party to become president and vice president.
To run as a ticket.
The way to stay. And then, I guess at some point they decided Washington, D.C. should have a say in who the president is. So the 23rd Amendment in 1961 gives D.C. 3 electors. Okay, so now we get to those faithless electors that you brought up a while ago. And a faithless elector is an elector from a state who votes different than how their state voted. Okay, so they cast a ballot that is not in line with how the voters in their state voted. Now, a faithless elector has never decided a presidency. So they've happened in the past, but they've never decided a presidency. In the modern era, it's been kind of rare, but occasionally electors change votes. It was more common in the 19th century, but they were usually changing votes for the vice president. So we have had, speaking of the 1900s, we've had one faithless elector in the elections of 1948, 56, 60, 68, 72, 76, 88. So you can see, it's not the most uncommon thing in the world, but those were only one person who did that. In the election of 2000, somebody cast a blank ballot. But in 2016, there were 7 faithless electors on the presidential ballot and 6 on the vice presidential ballot. 5 of the faithless electors were from states that voted from Hillary Clinton. And 3 of those votes went to Colin Powell. 1 went to Bernie Sanders, and another went to an Native American leader named Faith Spotted Eagle. And then 2.
So they were supposed to cast a vote
for Hillary Clinton,
but
they did not.
But they did not.
And then there were 2 faithless electors who were supposed to cast a vote for Trump, but did not. They were actually both from Texas, and one of them voted for John Kasich, and the other voted for Ron Paul, because Texas has an obsession with Ron Paul. Some Texans have an obsession with Ron Paul.
Okay. But you're saying that these faithless electors have never changed the outcome of an election?
They have not.
So it's really making a statement.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly what it is.
So tell me about winning the popular vote and losing an election. It seems like it happens all the time, but you're saying it's very rare.
It is very rare. It's only happened 5 times. 5 times in our nation's past has a candidate won the popular vote but lost an election. The first time was in 1824. That was Andrew Jackson, but it wasn't the Electoral College that decided that. There just wasn't a majority, so that got thrown into the House of Representatives.
Okay.
But he had the most popular votes. In 1867, Samuel Tilden had the most popular votes. But I, again, would not really blame that one on the Electoral College because 3 states were contested and a committee actually decided the outcome of that election. But then in 1888, Grover Cleveland won the popular vote, but Benjamin Henry Harrison won the electoral vote. And so Benjamin Harrison is going to win the election that year. In 2000, Al Gore, and then of course in 2016, Hillary Clinton. I think they get so much attention when it happens, and clearly, I mean, we went over 100 years before it happened again, and so there have been 2 in modern history, right. And so with the 24-hour news cycle, with as much press as everything gets, and then the fact that we've had 2 within the last 16 years causes it to get a lot more attention. But historically speaking, it's not something that's happened very many times.
Somebody asked what happens to the faithless electors. Do they get in trouble? Are they not allowed to be electors?
Well, y'all are just stealing my thunder for later in this. All of you are asking really good questions. There are some states nothing happens, but there are some states that actually have. I'm trying to think if it's. I think laws that says that they can't be a faithless elector, and if they do, some of them are fined with other penalties, but that really is decided by the state.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question.
All right, so tell me, obviously a lot of people don't like it.
Yeah.
Are there attempts to change it? Has anyone ever tried to get rid of it or change it?
There have been lots of attempts to change it. The one that has gotten the furthest was in the 91st Congress. They actually passed a law through, well, it would have to be a constitutional amendment because it's in the Constitution. So the only way to change it would be a constitutional amendment. So they passed it through the House in 1960. Hold on, let me see the date. I forgot it. 1969. But it failed in the Senate.
Okay.
And even if it had passed in the Senate, it would have to go to the states to ratify it. The most recent attempt was Barbara Boxer, who is a senator from California. She attempted to in 2017. That didn't go anywhere. That failed. But really, the biggest challenge to it today is a movement called National Popular Vote. And this is an attempt to completely skirt the Constitution. And I think that's why it should be concerning for people is if you want to change it, then you start a movement to change it through the Constitution because ultimately that's what governs us. But National Popular Vote, what they're doing instead is they're trying to go around the Constitution by going directly to the states and having a state, each state that's on board sign a contract that says they will commit their electoral votes to whoever wins the National Popular Vote. So what I see as the problem with that is that completely takes away state sovereignty, because if that would have meant in this last election, Texas, all 38 of Texas's electoral votes would have gone to Hillary Clinton because she won, right? And so that ultimately takes away the sovereignty of the state of Texas. And that really takes away the votes of the people in Texas because they actually didn't get to vote for the electors who voted on their behalf, if that makes sense. So that's the current movement of how to change the Electoral College in a nutshell.
All right, so any other important things that we should know about the Electoral College?
Yes.
Do you have any fun facts, Dr. Tarwater?
I do. Let me tell you the important things to know, and then we'll share some fun facts. All right. I want to say that elections are not only about swing states because swing states change. Not always from election to election, but they change fairly often.
I'll be honest, it seems like it's always about Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania, and Florida.
Yeah, but Vermont and Virginia, and Virginia have come into play in recent years. So all of it changes often. Sorry, not Vermont. For New Hampshire, you were right when you said New Hampshire.
And also states change.
Yes, that's exactly right. Every state, states are not always going to be blue or always going to be red. As recently as 1988, California was a solid, not solid, but a consistently red state. They consistently voted for Republicans. When did Texas shift? Was it the 90s?
70s and 80s we began the shift, and then our last Democratic governor was Ann Richards in the 1990s.
Yeah, so see, even for Texas, it hasn't been that long. So that's why your vote always matters, because it can't stay consistently that way if everybody is voting. And so every state and every vote matters. Your vote matters because while you might not directly be voting for the president, you are voting for people who vote on your behalf. And really, in that sense, it's similar to Congress, right? Because they make the laws on your behalf because you voted them there. It's the same thing with the electors. Also, the Electoral College makes it harder to steal elections because in order to steal an election, you would have to know which state is going to be the swing state, which states are going to be at play in that election, and you'd have to steal the election and cast fraudulent votes within that state only. Whereas if it's a popular vote, you can do that anywhere.
Right.
So, okay, now for my fun facts. So
they're only fun to us, though.
Yeah, they're.
Nobody else can see that.
I'm gonna say you and I probably have a
stealing my fun
different definitions of fun.
I just couldn't think of anything better to call it. So maybe they're not fun, but interesting.
Closer to fun.
Okay, electors cannot vote for a presidential and vice presidential candidate who both hail from an elector state. So if an elector from Texas cannot vote for a presidential candidate and a vice presidential candidate from Texas. In 2004, Colorado voters actually rejected a proportional system. So they had that on the ballot in 2004 and they said no. And one of y'all asked about the faithless electors. Washington, D.C. and 26 states bind their electors to vote for their promised candidate. So they can't change who they vote for. They have to vote according to how the people in their state voted. And if they do, there will be a penalty, like I said, fines or some other penalty according to what the state decides. And I just want to add, the founders understood that this would not always represent the will of the people. And that was okay because we don't live in a true democracy. And I think because we do study what a bunch of dead people had to say, it's easier for us to understand where they were coming from and to understand why they decided to do it this way. And one reason that I look to the founders to understand why they created it this way is because two things. First of all, they understood the history of democracy and governments better than most Americans today do. Most Americans today don't know the difference between a democracy, a true democracy, and a republic. The founders understood that and understood the history of it. And they had lived under a tyrannical government, which we really have not. And so they had a lot more stake in trying to prevent that from happening than we in 2018 do. And so I think that's why it's important that we see what they had to say and that we try to understand why they did things this way.
So, Misty, you're a deputy registrar, right?
I am.
So and the whole point of our webinar series here has to be getting people involved in the civic engagement. Do you think it's been successful?
I do. So Texas reached a record number of people to vote. We now have 15.6 million people registered to vote. I'm going to credit that to this webinar series.
I think that's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, based on my math as an English professor.
400,000 people that registered this year. It's because of us.
Yeah, it's us, 400,000 people. So, but in seriousness, 400,000 people have registered to vote this year.
Since March.
Since March.
Yes. Pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we are seeing more people that care about the system and care about having their voice heard. I know that this generation that is freshmen and sophomores in college right now gets a lot of flack for a lot of things, but they are also the first generation in 40 years that say becoming a civic leader is critical or important to them on nationwide surveys.
Yeah, I don't think people in my generation would have said that.
So I think there's a lot of hope here for younger people coming up to really affect and change the system.
It is, and it also shows you why it's important to understand the system
Right.
as well, because if you're going to work to change it,
You should know what you're changing.
absolutely.
Absolutely. So,
But none of this matters.
unless you vote.
Yes.
So, Early voting is from October 22nd to November 2nd. If you are a registered voter and you bring your voter ID, it's optional, but photo ID is mandatory to vote. If you vote on election day, you have to vote in your precinct. You can go to vote.org for more information. When are we walking people to the polls, Missy?
So on November 1st and 2nd, we are going to exercise our right to vote because we like puns. And we're going to walk about.
Some of us do.
About a block away. We don't actually have a polling place at Trinity River or DC Connect, but there's one about a block away.
Okay.
So we'll be walking there.
Okay.
November 1st, it's at 1 o'clock, I want to say, and November 2nd is at 11.
All right. And this is.
No,
so
I did it backwards.
November
1st is 11 and November 2nd is 1.
That's correct. And this is for anybody registered to vote in Tarrant County.
Yes.
Can participate.
Yes.
So I will be here walking with you, but
Awesome.
I will be voting in Denton County at another time.
Oh, you're just going to be like a Sherpa?
Well, I'm happy to
I will direct as
participate.
well because I have to vote Johnson County.
So I will be there to participate, but I will be voting in Denton County
Good to know.
in also my local elections.
So if you don't come early vote, you can vote on election day. However, the lines can sometimes be a little long. So I highly, highly, highly recommend early voting whenever possible.
Absolutely. So as we said before, we have 2 more webinars in our webinar series coming up. October, I gave you the dates earlier and then I forgot them. But we hope you participate in those. And I hope that you share your feedback with us about this particular webinar so we can continue to make them better. And next semester, we'll have webinars on some other topic.
So to get credit for attending live, give us about 5 minutes and then reload this webpage. And where it says video description, there will be a link for the credit survey.
So you're going to see the link in the video description, and it's going to take you to a different Google form where you put in your name, your teacher's name, and you answer a few questions to basically to make sure that you paid attention and got some value out of the webinar.
Yes.
And then Professor Wilson Mertens sends the information to your instructor. So once you fill out that form and put your name, your teacher's name, there's nothing else you have to do in order to get the credit for attending.
Right, and that link stays up for about 24 hours. If you're watching this after 24 hours have ended, you need to talk to your professor about what you need to do to get credit because it'll vary depending class to class.
All right, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who's engaging us in the comments. These were great questions, great comments. We appreciate your feedback, and if you've got anything else to share with us, please do put it on that survey. All right, that's all for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.